Thank you all very much for helping us understand what we see and what we don't see. I wanted to pick up on the question I asked earlier in the hearing. We're being told that a range of Iranian dissidents, human rights activists feel and caution that U.S. support for them or the human rights issues can be counterproductive. Wondering if you could comment on whether religious communities and the communities about whom you testified here today feel the same way. Baha'is, Jews, Christians, Sunni Arabs, including the Turkmen who have been under some pressure recently. And would U.S. engagement with Iran change this view?
Go ahead, Dan. If I may, the problem is U.S. support can mean so many things, and we need to calibrate what we mean by U.S. support. Is it for violent overthrow of the regime, or is it for giving resources to women's rights groups to organize themselves? There's so many different forms that we can't speak in blanket terms. So I think that at one level, yes, U.S. support has played into the hands of the regime by allowing it to demonize the civil society. And if you look at the arrest of Dr. Haleh Esfandiari, Professor Ramin Jahanbegloo, and all of these public intellectuals, you see that in every instance, the charge is one of sort of conspiracy to foment a velvet revolution as part of some sort of U.S. conspiracy. Now, the regime would probably do that anyways, but I think that this sort of bellicose rhetoric only helps them rationalize it and legitimize it in the eyes of the public, Iranian public, that otherwise would be prone to supporting this sort of opposition. So it's a question of calibrating. But on the other hand, as I mentioned, there's a fear of sort of some sort of military confrontation, violent overthrow on the part of the Iranian public. But there's an equal fear of a grand bargain which would lead to appeasement of Iran. And that's the other side of the equation. Mm-hmm. I think that the point is that there must be engagement, but the engagement should be principled. And if I may just briefly explain that one of the points here is that you have two Irans. You have the Iran of the hardliners. You have the Iran of the vast majority, which has yet to find a political voice, but which is in the process of doing so. The policy has to, on the one hand, isolate the hardliners and empower the majority. That's why it has to be calibrated and nuanced. Now, getting back to the question of accountability, I'm not going to give you the details, but I would say that at least 2 members of the cabinet of Mr. Ahmadinejad could be prosecuted for crimes against humanity. I'm not using that in a polemical way. I'm a former war crimes prosecutor. I can tell you what the evidence against them is. The former Minister of Justice, Mr. Shushtari, was implicated in the mass execution of 4,000 people in 1988, a famous execution of 4,000 leftists in Iran. The Prosecutor General of Tehran, Saeed Mortazavi, is implicated in the arrest and torture of thousands, including Canadian-Iranian photojournalist Zahra Kazemi. So you see here a sort of a process by which human rights abuses are a rite of passage to gaining power. And that defines the sensibility of the government, both in terms of repression of domestic dissent and how it perceives its foreign policy interests. The point that I'm making is that at the end of the day, the cost of those violations have to be individualized. You cannot impose sanctions that are going to hurt the ordinary people that are already suffering. You must send a message to those that use human rights violations as part of their cost-benefit calculus that they will personally pay. And had there been more time, I would have been very pleased to speak about how some elements of the regime have, in addition to human rights violations, stolen hundreds of millions of dollars of the oil wealth of Iran and used it in investments across the world, probably in this country as well. So we need to look beyond this sort of abstract notion of Iran and start targeting those individuals and their practices. And I just want to end by saying that it was very impressive, I suppose, for my dear friend Roy and I to hear that Mr. Rafsanjani had been telling Dr. Slavin that America's reputation has suffered as a result of Guantanamo Bay. Anyone that knows anything about Mr. Rafsanjani's record, including his role in a number assassinations abroad, if I may add, including the assassination of my dear friend Roya's father in Paris, his role in the bombing of the Jewish Cultural Center in Argentina, would, I think twice before quoting him as a critique of U.S. human rights policy.